So there we were. We were right there. Right on the ragged edge of the abyss. God and I had this contest to see if Job could be persuaded to turn his back on God. God said that he couldn't. God said that Job was too upright a citizen to do something like that. And I just said, are you kidding me? Because I knew there was nothing that special about Job. Job was just, he was a guy. He was like any of you, except he was richer, with a bigger family and a better life. He was like you. And I knew I could get him to turn his back. God said I could do anything but kill him. I took him at his word. I went to Job and I took everything he had. I mean everything. I took everything he owned. I killed his family. I took his health. I took away his social life by giving him this skin disease that I knew wouldn't kill him but would make him wish he were dead. And all of this in just a week or two of time. The man was a mess. But the crowning glory of it all didn't even come from me. It wasn't even my doing. It came from his own friends. Because his friends came to console him in all of his misery. And they ended up preaching to him about how all of this had to be his fault, somehow. They told him, they said, Job, God doesn't punish the righteous. He only punishes the sinful, so you're obviously being punished, so you must have done something. What was it? And Job protested his innocence, and they just kept hammering at him, and they said, Job, you need to get right with God. You need to confess what you did. Maybe this will all stop. And that's when it happened. I was trying to think of how I could say this in church. Job finally grew a backbone. He finally grew enough of a backbone to stand up to God, and he said, I want answers. I want to know why this is happening to me. I want to know why you are letting me suffer this way, and I want you right here, right now, in front of me. Show yourself, God. Answer my questions. And then something totally unexpected happened. God showed up. I'll repeat that. God showed up. One of his little creatures, one of his little creations finally got up the gumption to stand up on his hind legs and challenge God, to question how God runs this circus down here, and God responds to him by actually showing up. Sky turned black. The wind picked up. And suddenly Job found himself standing face to face with this whirlwind, this tempest. If you can imagine the sound of it. The sound just washing right over him and just enveloping him. And the darkness. And if Job hasn't had an accident yet by this point, I'm pretty sure he did when God actually spoke to him out of the whirlwind. You know how when you're in a public place and there's a couple having a fight right in front of you. You know, one of those really ugly fights where the voices are raised and tempers are flaring, and they're just going after one another. Or maybe you're in public and there's a parent and a child, and the parent is just chewing the kid up one side and down the other because of something they've done. And you're standing right there, within arm's reach of them. And you're wishing that you could just sort of fade into the woodwork and not be here right now. You watch this spectacle and you want to be anywhere but there. I don't have that. I love those kinds of things because I get my best stuff there. There is stuff that happens there that I can go back to years later and say, by the way, do you remember when she said this? It's great. I love it. So I just stood there and I watched. I watched and I listened, and I'll be honest, I gloated a little bit. God played whack-a-mole with Job's heart. I tell you, I'm not ADD. Trust me. Have you seen Jesus Christ Superstar? Anybody? You know that first line when Pontius Pilate comes into his court and he sees Jesus there? Jesus is already beaten up. And Pilate says, "Who is this broken man cluttering up my hallway?" That's what God did. It's exactly what he did. God looked at Job, this miserable scrap of humanity, and he said, "Who is this that obscures my plans by words without knowledge? Who dares to challenge me and my actions?" And he says, "Brace yourself, human. I've got some questions for you." And I remember looking at Job. He was as white as a sheet. He could barely stand. His legs were knocking together. And I remember thinking, I hope you brought a change of underwear. And God just laid into him. And it was, as near as I can recall at least, it was something like this. God began, "Were you even there when I created the universe? Maybe I just didn't see you, but were you there? Were you there when I stirred the chaos and brought forth the universe? Were you there when I stirred the chaos with my spirit and brought order out of the chaos?" Maybe you were there and I don't remember. Were you there when I laid down the laws that would govern how the universe runs itself? Or were you there when I made the stars to shine and I put the oceans in their place? Tell me if you know, Job. Which way to the abode of light? Where does the darkness go in the morning? You think you are so smart, Job. Have you ever walked on the bottom of the ocean? Have you told the dawn when to come, or led the darkness back to its place at the end of the day? You know what, Job? Tell you what. You want to understand my ways. So tell you what. Make me another one of these. Can you do that? Make it out of nothing but the atoms in the dirt. Was that too hard? Tell you what, take this clay. Mold me a human being. And then breathe life and spirit into it. Can you do that, Job? You can't? Too hard for you? And tell me this, can you bind the stars in their places in the sky and then just bring them forth when it's their time? I watched, and it was brutal. I mean, God went on and on and on, which, God does. Who's going to stop him? When God's talking to you, it's not the time to check your watch and say, hey, I think I have another appointment. But it's been fun. But he went on, and poor Job didn't know what to do, to the point where I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for Job. And I'll tell you, when Satan feels sorry for you, you've got problems. You are at a new low in your life. You're at a new low in anybody's life. I mean, after everything that I did to him, after everything that happened, I think this was probably the worst of it. To stand there and listen to God saying this to you. And I think maybe God had a lot of pent-up frustration to let out, and Job was just the wrong guy at the wrong time. Let's face it, you human beings are fickle. You are notoriously fickle. The truth is, you don't really want God's protection. You don't want God looking over your shoulder and protecting you from everything. Because, here's a cosmic truth for you. If God protected you from everything bad, God would be spending most of his time protecting you from yourself. Because you don't make the greatest decisions. When you're 60 years old and you have a heart attack, you might very well bewail the injustice of it all and wonder where God is and how could God let this happen to you. But in the 60 years leading up to that point, you wouldn't have been very happy if God had come around and kept you from, sopping up Karo syrup with your bread and eating bacon and Spam fried. You have this nasty little habit of getting yourselves into trouble and then asking God to get you out of it. Sometimes God does, sometimes God doesn't. The point is, you are not the least bit qualified to question why he does it sometimes and not others. You are not qualified to question his judgment. Here's another thing. I wasn't there at the very beginning, but I came along pretty shortly afterwards. I can tell you this, God created the universe to run like this fine watch. There are all of these intricate laws that govern everything, and the universe just ticks along. And God created it that way so that God wouldn't have to micromanage every particle, every moment of the day. God set up a self-sustaining system. That also means that you can count on the things in this world behaving in a predictable, rational way. Look around you. The universe is this beautiful machine. underpowered core made of nickel and iron. And you think, yeah, so what? But it spins. It rotates. And again, you think, yeah, so what? But the mere fact that it's made of those elements and that it spins means that it creates an electrical charge, which creates a magnetic field which protects the Earth from cosmic rays and solar flares. If we didn't have that, you wouldn't be here. Who thinks of stuff like that? God. That's the kind of detail that went into God's creation. And I think that's kind of the point God was getting at in his kind of Old Testament way. Human beings misunderstand how God operates. You think that a loving God would keep bad things from ever happening. You think that a loving God would be continually intervening in the laws of the universe, for his own laws, mind you, just to run interference for you all. The reality is that God shows his love most just by being there for you when the bad times come. God shows his love by being your rock and the one thing that you know is always going to be there with you and alongside you. Forever and unchanging. God shows his love for you by being your comfort and your strength when things are bad. And if God's willing to do that for all 7 billion of you, the offer's there for anybody who's a human being. If God is willing to do that for all 7 billion of you, then challenging God's judgment and motive seems kind of petty, don't you think? You live in a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each with something like 100 billion stars and who knows how many planets. Isn't the fact that God knows you by name good enough for you? Isn't the fact that God cares, that God reaches out to you with grace and love and mercy whenever you need it, whenever you're hurting, isn't that enough? I think Job said it best. Well, we'll have to wait on that.